You probably know of, or at least have heard of, frequency separation, a technique that was very popular and turned mainstream a few years ago and is still quite popular with many artists. However, it turned out that quite a few people knew very little about this theory behind the method and its application. For those who don't know, frequency separation is a technique by which we split the photo into two parts so that we can edit the image in two separate and independent copies. If we are working on a portrait, in one copy, we retain the information about the texture details, such as skin pores, skin lines, hair strands, etc. And in the other copy, it contains information about colors, tones, shadows, and light and dark areas. The idea behind this separation is the great flexibility that this method gives us. To do this, the copy containing the colors and the tone information must be blurred to remove the details and leave only the colors visible. So, if you only look at this copy, you can recognize the image, but it won't contain any fine details. And in the other copy, it's the other way around. We preserve the details, but without recognizable colors and tones. The very first and already outdated technique of this separation method, which is still widely used, involves the use of a filter, which makes it useless in most cases. Over the years, our community has reached the conclusion that it cannot be applied because there is one major drawback. Therefore, this work technique had to be rethought and improved so that it could be applied in those cases in which it was considered impossible before. I'll show you the new mode of operation, but in order to see its advantages, we must first look at the old technique and compare them. To do this, we'll duplicate the layer twice. We'll turn off the top layer to see what's going on the bottom layer, where I've applied a filter that should remove all the details of the picture. The old method involves using the Gaussian blur filter, which is found in Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. We choose a value that removes the details but keeps the image clear. We'll save only the colors in this layer. After selecting the values to work with, we click OK. We then show the top layer, in which we'll keep only the texture details, removing the colors, which we already have on the bottom layer. To do this, we'll use a menu in Photoshop, which will help us with this part, and it is located in Image and Apply Image. Apply Image is designed to blend layers or channels in an image and create different combinations, and that's exactly what we'll do now. Here, we need to tell Photoshop that from our source, which is our original image, we need to subtract the blurred image with the color and then to apply the leftover texture to the high layer we have now selected. It's pretty easy to understand, and the only thing which could mislead you are these numbers, which don't seem to mean anything at first glance. Scale is a multiplier that multiplies the difference between the two layers. And in the Offset option, we choose 128, which is an average number, because in Photoshop, 0 means pitch black, and 255 is the maximum number of color. That's pure white. Ergo, the middle number of 128 will give us 50% gray. And why gray? You'll find out in just a few seconds. Note that we are currently working on an opened 8-bit image, and we use these settings in the Apply Image for an 8-bit image. If you're working on a 16-bit image, you have to change a few things. For example, the blending effect you have to choose for a 16-bit image is not Subtract, as it's currently selected, but instead of that, you have to choose Add from the blending option. For the Offset option, you should choose 0 rather than 128. For the Scale option, you should leave it as 2 and not change anything. And the last thing you have to do is select this checkbox for the Invert option in the Apply Image menu settings. What you see right now is the difference that remains after we've removed the colors from the photo. This is the texture that is contained in the photo. And now, after creating a very strange-looking photo on which you will see mostly small details, we click OK. We make the layer 50% gray because the last step is to choose a blending effect, that will tell Photoshop to ignore all the gray parts of the photo and create a color copy. In order to achieve this, we will use linear light from the blending effects of the layers. Now, in combination with the two layers, we already have an original image. Note that if you're working on a 16-bit image, you have to choose linear light for the blending option of the layer as it's for the 8-bit image. For this step, nothing changes. Let's group them together to make the work environment more orderly. Awesome. As I said, the idea of frequency separation is that on one layer you can exclusively work with the colors of the image without changing the texture, and on the other you can make changes to the texture without changing the colors, and overall color transitions are more smooth and invisible, just like dodge and burn, but much faster, saving time when working in small areas. Here, I need to give you important information. In order to work in either of these two layers with the stamp tool or the healing brush, you need to select the current layer option in the tool's sample drop-down option to avoid problems. Because if we do not use these tools with the current layer option in the tool's sample drop-down option, something completely different will happen, which will ruin the whole process. This technique is great, but the problem I have when using this method arises when I get near an edge. For example, let's see how we can eliminate those little hairs in this part that in principle I would normally not remove because they give the image greater realism. For the purposes of explanation, in this case, I'll remove them. Because we used a blur filter that scatters pixels and does not preserve the edges, when we work near those edges, we can't really use it. This is very relevant when I work on product photos, landscapes, and other similar projects which contain more edges and borders between light and dark. You may not find too many problems with portrait or beauty images, but with other photographs, this method is near useless. There are cases of important projects where I've needed to work near the edges and couldn't get what I want as a result for this very reason. Therefore, I use another method that is many times better and more sophisticated and does the exact same thing, except it doesn't change the edges. I'll begin by deleting everything I've done so far. Then I will duplicate the background image twice, as in our previous example, and I'll turn off the second layer, and instead of using Gaussian blur filter, which blurs everything plus the edges, I'll use the median filter found in Filter, Noise, Median. You can see that it retains more of the edges which we want to preserve. Now, let's try to do the same thing we did earlier. As you can see, I was much more successful in making changes to the part I had problems with, which was basically useless before. If you want to be as flexible as possible in your work, you can do like I do and create a new empty layer between the high and low layers with the blending option set to normal, and work on it rather than the low layer, and the second empty layer set on color blending option to work and change the colors on it rather than the low layer. That way, you'll keep your two layers intact, giving you full control over your workflow. However, you should use the healing brush and the stamp tool on the blank layer with options set to current and below, or all layers, because the layer is empty and you have to get information from the layers beneath it. I rarely use the frequency separation technique because I work on my pictures with the dodge and burn technique. It may be slower as a process, but the results I get are always more realistic. However, when I use the frequency separation technique, I want full control over my workflow, and I don't trust the old-fashioned methods of splitting and blurring a photo.